my very first Elder Scrolls lore video, I highlighted how amazing and important the tutorial for Oblivion was, and how influential in video game design, and just how well put together it was. And for the Oblivion remaster, that is still definitely the case. It is this moment for you to create your own character in the universe that is distinct and yours, and it gives you an incredibly great through line on how to learn the game, learn the mechanics, and gives you a little bit of freedom to tackle challenges the way you would like to do it. And then by the end, they give you another opportunity to make more tweaks to your character if you really want to. But there's another part of the tutorial and opening sequence of Oblivion that is even more important, which is meeting and getting to learn about the Emperor of the Empire, Uriel Septim VII. And in my very first Elder Scrolls lore video, I made a statement that Oblivion feels like the center point of the Elder Scrolls universe. And very specifically, the tutorial to Oblivion feels like a very natural starting point for the Elder Scrolls universe. And it's very fitting that one of the very first characters you meet is Uriel Septim VII, who plays a very important role in the very beginning of Oblivion. Unfortunately, he dies by the end of the tutorial, but it's an introduction to a character that has a very long history in the previous games of Elder Scrolls. And before we go on a huge lore deep dive on Uriel Septim VII, it would mean a lot if you would like the video and subscribe to the channel. It goes a long way to helping me make more of this content. Thank you. A passing of the torch moment, because it is his end and his goodbye to the story, but it's sort of giving us a piece of the history and then showing us that his time is done and now this is a new era of Elder Scrolls. But I did think it was really important for us to go over Uriel Septim VII, who in Oblivion is played by Patrick Stewart, who does an amazing performance playing a ruler with hamming up his Scottish accent. And Uriel Septim VII is one of the few rulers of Tamriel. He is an emperor in the Empire during this period of time. Does cover all of Tamriel from the Somerset Isles to Morrowind to Daggerfall to Blackmarsh. And very little is known about Uriel Septim VII's early life. There we get one little tidbit of information about it in the book, The Real Berenzia. Do you remember, sire, Symmachus and I had dinner with your family shortly after your father's coronation? You were no older than tiny Morriga here. We were greatly honored to be the only guests that evening. Except for your best friend Justin, of course. Yes, the Emperor said, smiling cautiously. Very cautiously. I do believe I recall that. You and Justin were such friends, your majesty. I was told he died not long after a great pity. Indeed, I do not like to speak of him. His eyes turned blank, or blanker. If it had been possible, as for your request, my lady, we shall take it under advisement and let you know. Berenzia bowed, as did the children. A nod from the Emperor dismissed them, and they backed away from the imperial presence. She took a deep breath when they emerged from the throne room. Justin had been an imaginary playmate, although young Uriel had insisted a place be set for Justin at every meal. Not only that Justin, despite the boyish name, had been a girl. Symmachus had kept up the joke long after she had gone the way of imaginary childhood friends, inquiring after Justin's health whenever he and Uriel Septim met, and being responded to in a mock-serious fashion. The last Berenzia had heard of Justin several years ago, the Emperor had evidently joked elaborately to Symmachus that she had met an adventurous, though incorrigible Khajiit youth, married him and settled down in Lilidrinth to raise fire ferns and mugworts. The man sitting on the Emperor's divan was not Uriel Septim. The nightingale? Could it be? Yes, yes. A chord of recognition rang through her, and Berenzia knew she was right. It was him. It was the nightingale, masquerading as the Emperor. Symmachus had been wrong, so wrong. So before getting into the implications of what just transpired in that dialogue between Uriel Septim, or who we believe to be Uriel Septim and Berenzia, it's interesting to sort of look at Uriel Septim's childhood. It seems like he had a very active imagination and was very playful and fun and cunning and very interesting, aloof character. But the other implication of what we just read relates to the very first Elder Scrolls game, Arena. And the plot of Arena being that the Emperor, and this was a fair amount of years before Oblivion, but Uriel Septim VII, being the Emperor, was betrayed by his battle mage Jagar Tharn and transported to a other plane of Oblivion, where he was held captive for 10 years, and Jagar Tharn took on the appearance of Uriel Septim VII and took control of the Empire. And then eventually the Eternal Champion, the main character of Arena that you play, eventually puts all the pieces of the Chaos Staff together, defeats Jagar Tharn, and is able to bring back Uriel Septim VII into the real world from Oblivion, and he can rightfully take his place back on the throne again. So Uriel Septim VII has sort of a history of relying on heroes to help him out. And we learn some of this in the Brief History of the Empire, which also describes how Uriel Septim eventually takes power after his father. Elisa's 25-year-old son Pelagius was thus crowned Pelagius IV. Pelagius IV continued his aunt's work, slowly bringing back under his wing the radical and refractory kingdoms, duchies, and baronies of the empire. He exercised Morahau's poise and circumspect pace in his endeavors, but alas, he did not attain her success. The kingdoms had been free of constraint for so long that even a benign imperial presence was considered odious. Nevertheless, when Pelagius died after a notably stable and prosperous 29-year reign, Tamriel was closer to unity than it had ever been since the days of Uriel I. Our current emperor, his awesome and terrible majesty, Uriel Septim VII, son of Pelagius IV, has the diligence of his great aunt Morahau, the political skill of his great uncle Uriel VI, and the military prowess of his great grand uncle Uriel V. For 21 years he reigned and brought justice and order to Tamriel. In the year Third Era 389, however, his imperial battle mage, Jagar Tharn, betrayed him. Uriel VII was imprisoned in a dimension of Tharn's creation, and Tharn used his sorcery of illusion to assume the Emperor's aspect. For the next 10 years, Tharn abused imperial privilege, but did not continue Uriel VII's schedule of reconquest. It is not yet entirely known what Tharn's goals and personal accomplishments were during the 10 years he masqueraded as his liege lord. In the Third Era 399, an enigmatic champion defeated the battle mage in the dungeons of the Imperial Palace and freed Uriel VII from his other dimensional jail. Since his emancipation, Uriel Septim VII has worked diligently to renew the battles that would reunite Tamriel. Tharn's interference broke the momentum, it is true, but the years since then have proven that there is hope of the golden age of Tiber Septim's rule, glorifying Tamriel once again. So obviously, being an empire and wanting to have control over everything, emperors of the empire have been trying to take full control of Tamriel. And it seems that Uriel Septim VII is one of the more successful emperors of this time. And we will get into how he was able to gain control over places like Daggerfall and as well as Morrowind. And of course, after being freed, his first conquest was to reclaim and restructure and put together the warring and rebellious counties and kingdoms of Daggerfall. And this brings us to the story of Daggerfall and the game Daggerfall. And Uriel Septim VII is the character who's talking to you at the very beginning of the game in the intro with the live action footage of him, and I believe that Chancellor Akado standing next to him. And you, as the player, assume the role of the agent, a member of the Blades who is being sent to claim the totem of Tiber Septim so you can gain control over the Numidium, which is sort of the giant mech golem creature that the dwarves created that Tiber Septim took over from the tribunal houses and was able to then use it to conquer the rest of Tamriel. And using that's sort of the goal, is to reactivate it, defeat Daggerfall, and retake control of it all. And the events that are the conclusion of that game can go many different ways in the game itself. You have multiple different endings and factions you can ally with, but it all gets retconned into a multi-faction winning scenario called the warp in the west, which is considered a dragon break, where time sort of transcends itself and sort of a new reality is sort of generated from it all rather than sort of following traditional logic. And I won't go into all the specifics of what happens in the warp in the west, but we do get a current political affairs in the book The Warp in the West, which will give us sort of an idea of what the agent was able to accomplish for Tiber Septim there. Almost 20 years have passed, and the region, though transformed, has stabilized. There are no more disputed territories, and the kingdoms of Daggerfall, Wayrest, Sentinel, and Orsinium hold their new borders in relative peace. Wayrest spreads across the eastern coast of the bay, stretching from the land formerly called Anticlair to half of Gudavdun. Edaware has passed on to his ancestors, leaving his kingdom in the hands of his daughter, Elsana, who has 2 children by her royal consort, and seems likely to hold her father's lands. Your lordship may also choose to communicate directly with King Helseth and Queen Berezia in Mournhold. Their primary preoccupations are, of course, with Morrowind's affairs, but they may still have useful observations upon Wayrest's ruling families and political environment that may aid you in your understanding of the court of Queen Elisana. King Gortwog of Orsinium controls much of the Rothgarian mountains as well as the profitable river coast of the Bajorse. He persists in his demands that Orsinium be recognized as an imperial province separate from Hyrok. The Elder Council treats Gortwog as a recognized king and collects taxes directly from Orsinium, but officially Orsinium remains a county of Hyrok, though technically it spans both the provinces of Hyrok and Hammerfell. Sentinel has gained the most land, sprawling across the entire southern Iliac Bay from Abigora beyond the Dragontail Mountains to the edge of Mornmoth. Orsinium's territory, Queen Acorithine, at her death, left her enormous kingdom to her only surviving son, Latun, who is now surely one of the most powerful kings in Tamriel. Daggerfall is still ruled by the Breton king Gorthid and the Redguard queen Obuk. Their land now encompasses all of western Hyrok. From the border they share with Wayrest at Enclair to the east to Yakaln to the north. They have 4 children now and are much beloved in their realm. If there are other repercussions of the mysterious warp in the west, they have not yet come to our attention in the course of 20 years of observation. So, with the help of the agent and using subterfuge and trying to get the totem of Tiber Septim and activating the Neminium, it seems that everything has been sort of put into its most ideal place for Uriel Septim, and Daggerfall and northern Hammerfell are ready and willing members of the Empire. And I think it's sort of important to note that Uriel Septim VII did all of this without invading and taking over and trying to do all of this, sort of brute force tactic of bending the will of all these kingdoms. He used subterfuge and the agents and secrecy and the events of Daggerfall to help facilitate them to all fall in line, which I think shows how Uriel Septim's character is much more cunning and shadowy than you would normally think of an emperor. With Daggerfall and Hammerfell and Orsinium taken care of, Uriel Septim then turned his attention to Morrowind. He first began to start to bend the will of Morrowind towards the Empire by recruiting the House Lalu to culturally change Morrowind from being sort of the religious orthodoxy that it was, centered around the tribunal gods, and more of a trader, much more of a atheistic or agnostic society built more around trade. But obviously that only goes so far, and the other tactic that Uriel did was he facilitated to some extent and manipulated the prophecy of the Neverine's existence. You could say the player character of Morrowind, who becomes the Neverine, was that the only prisoner that Uriel Septim VII sent to Morrowind, or did he maybe sort of seed multiple people and sort of played the numbers to try and figure out how to get the Neverine to exist? We don't fully know what the true outcome of that is, but he did have some sort of hand in it, which also, once again, gives us an interesting look into how he works, which is he is able to sort of look at the world in a more metaphysical and through this sort of view of the gods, basically, because he basically helps Azura's prophecy of getting revenge on the tribunal gods come to fruition. And this sort of references kind of the way Uriel talks in the Oblivion tutorial, where he sort of talks about seeing the gods, seeing his dreams, and being guided by them. And, you know, I think that you could easily make that jump to seeing how he navigated the situation in Daggerfall to also how he navigated the situation in Morrowind. And then with basically the Neverine taking revenge off of their past life's death on the tribunal gods and defeating them, and basically turning Morrowind to more centered around the worship of the Nine Divines, much more of an agnostic society, but also the power firmly in the hands of King Helseth, and sort of the cultural commerce side of things being handled by the House Lalu, who is much more empire oriented. And we can hear all this on A Short Life of Uriel Septim VII. The early decades of Emperor Uriel's life were marked by aggressive expansion and consolidation of imperial influence throughout the empire, but especially in the east, in Morrowind and Blackmarsh, where the empire's power was limited. Imperial culture was weak, and native customs and traditions were strong and staunchly opposed to assimilation. During this period, Uriel greatly benefited from the arcane support and shrewd counsel of his close advisor, the imperial battle mage Jagar Tharn. The story of Uriel's marriage to the princess Kali Voria is a less happy tale. Though she was a beautiful and charming woman, greatly loved and admired by the people, the empress was a deeply unpleasant, arrogant, ambitious, grasping woman. She snared Uriel Septim with feminine wiles, but Uriel Septim thereafter soon regretted his mistake and was repelled by her. They heartily detested one another and went out of their ways to hurt one another. Their children were victims of this unhappy marriage. With his agile mind and vaunting ambition, Uriel soon outstripped his master in the balancing skills of threat and diplomacy. Uriel's success in co-opting House Lalu as an advanced guard of imperial culture and economic development in Morrowind is a noteworthy example. However, Uriel also grew in pride and self-assurance. Jagar Tharn fed Uriel's pride in hiding behind the mask of an outpaced former master counselor. Tharn purchased the complete trust that led finally to Uriel's betrayal and imprisonment in Oblivion, and Tharn's secret usurpation of the imperial throne. Little is known of Uriel's experience while trapped in Oblivion. He says he remembers nothing but an endless sequence of waking and sleeping nightmares. He says he believed himself to be dreaming and had no notion of passage of time. Publicly, he long claimed to have no memory of the dreams and nightmares of his imprisonment, but from time to time, during the interviews with the Emperor, the former basis of this biography, he would relate details of nightmares he had, and would describe them as similar to the nightmares he had when he was imprisoned in Oblivion. He seemed not so much unwilling as incapable of describing the experience. But it is clear that the experience changed him. In the Third Era, 389, he was a young man, full of pride, energy, and ambition. During the Restoration, after his rescue and return to the throne, he was an old man, grave, patient, and cautious. He also became conservative and pessimistic. Where the policies of his early life were markedly bold, even rash, Uriel's accounts for his change as a reaction to and revulsion for the early teachings and counsel of Jagar Tharn. However, Uriel's exile in Oblivion also clearly drained and wasted him in body and spirit, though his mind retained the shrewd cunning and flexibility of his youth. The story of Jagar Tharn's magical impersonation of the Emperor and the unmasking of Tharn's imposture by Queen Berenzia in the roles played by King Edwin and Rhea Salamane, and her champion in assembling the Staff of Chaos, defeating the renegade imperial battle mage Jagar Tharn, and restoring Uriel to the throne, is treated at length in Stern Gamboj's excellent 3-volume biography of Berenzia. There is no reason to recount that narrative here. Summarized briefly, Jagar Tharn's neglect and mismanagement of imperial affairs resulted in a steady decline in the empire's economic prosperity, allowed many petty lords and kings to challenge the authority of the empire, and permitted strong local rulers in the east and the west to indulge in open warfare over lands and sovereign rights. Restoration, the miracle of peace in Vardenfell. During the Restoration, Uriel Septim turned from the aggressive campaign of military intimidation and diplomatic accommodation of his earlier years, and relied instead on clandestine manipulation of affairs behind the scenes, primarily through the agencies of various branches of the Blades. A complete assessment of the methods and objectives of this period must wait until after the emperor's death, when the voluminous diaries archived at his country estate may be open to the public, and when the blades no longer need to maintain secrecy to protect the identities of its agents. Two signal achievements of this period point to the efficacy of Uriel's subtle policies. The miracle of peace, also popularly known as the warp in the west that transformed the Iliac Bay region from the rural assortment of warring petty kingdoms into the well-ordered and peaceful modern counties of Hammerfell, Sentinel, Wayrest, and Orsinium, and the colonization of Vardenfell, presided over by the skillful machinations of King Helseth of Morrowind and Lady Berenzia, the Queen Mother, which brought Morrowind more closely into the sphere of imperial influence. The Golden Peace, King Helseth's court, and the Nine in the east. Following the miracle of peace, best described in Per Vidersson's Daggerfall, A Modern History, the Empire entered a period of peace and prosperity comparable to the early years of Uriel's reign. With the Empire heartland in the west solidly integrated into the Empire, Uriel was able to turn his full attention to the east, to Morrowind. Exploiting conflicts at the heart of Morrowind's monolithic tribunal religion and the long-established great house system of government, and taking advantage of the terrible threat that the corrupted divine beings at the heart of the tribunal religion presented to the growing colonies of Vardenfell, Uriel worked through the shadowy agents of the Blades and through the court of King Helseth and Mournhold to shift the center of political power in Morrowind from the great house councils to Helseth's court, and took advantage of the collapse of the orthodox tribunal cults to establish the Nine Divines as the dominant faiths in Hlaalu and Vardenfell districts. Hasfat Annabulis' treatment of the establishment of the Nines in the East in his 4-volume Life and Times of the Neverveen is comprehensive. However, he fails to resolve the central mystery of this period. How much did Uriel know about the prophecies of the Neverveen, and how did he learn of their significance? The definitive resolution of this and other mysteries must await the future release of the Emperor's private papers, or a relenting of the Blade's strict policies of secrecy concerning their agents. So I think we get sort of an interesting through line in this story, which is that Uriel Septim's banishment to oblivion actually had a very profound effect on him. It sort of showed him how to use prophecy and destiny and sort of the metaphysical magics of the world of Tamriel to his will, and use it to quell the rebellions in Daggerfall and Hammerfell, as well as taking down the tribunal religion and bringing the Nine Divines to Morrowind. I think this is very interesting in sort of the context of other characters who have reached some sort of level of divine enlightenment. Speaking of Kim specifically, I'm not 100% sure if you could say that Uriel had experienced Kim, but I think the spending of so much time in oblivion obviously changed him and enlightened him in some way, that he was able to sort of transcend reality in some way and work between the threads of time and the prophecies of destiny and bend it to his will. And we can learn more about him in the Pocket Guide to the Empire, specifically the Third Era. The most famous trouble of recent years came early in the reign of our current emperor, Uriel Septim VII. By wile and sorcery, his trusted battle mage Jagar Tharn imprisoned and impersonated his liege. The 10 years that Tharn realigned the so-called Imperial Simulacrum was a time when old troubles resurfaced, forgotten grudges rekindled, and wars flared throughout the land. In the east, Morrowind attacked Blackmarsh in the Arsenian War. In the north, Skyrim battled High Rock and Hammerfell in the War of Bender Macha. In the south, Elsewhere took arms against Valenwood in the 5-Year War. In the west, Valenwood also lost land to its old ally Somerset in the War of the Blue Divide. Yet all of these troubles, and even more recent bizarre circumstances in the Iliac Bay and Morrowind, paint only a picture with blood in the year Third Era 432, the year of this guide's publication. The Empire stands strong and united in the chapters that follow. A more detailed portrait of the history and current events of each province is presented. And then we sort of get a current events of things right before Oblivion occurs. In the Imperial Court, there is thankfully no such tragedy. While the Emperor chose not to remarry following the Empress's death, more than 50 years ago. She left him 3 healthy boys who have spent their adult years learning the art of politics from their masterful liege and father. Crown Prince Gadal has already taken many of Uriel's responsibilities and has impressed one and all with his acumen. As the heart of the empire is solid, all of Tamriel is strong. Now, obviously, this is sort of the pride before the fall in Uriel Septim's life. He sort of is at the top of the world here. He has conquered all of his political enemies and sort of the usurpers around the edges of the empire. Everything seems to be in the right position. He's got his sons who can take over for him now that he's sort of older in age. And that's when things kind of don't go well for him, and he is, like we see in the tutorial for Oblivion, he is assassinated by the Mythic Dawn cult. Something that he sees through the destinies. I think he sort of realizes that as much as destiny up until this point has benefited him, it was not intended just to purely benefit him. It was sort of, this is the track that the world was going to go on one way or the other. And this also is part of that, sort of the track of him getting assassinated and all of his sons being assassinated by the Mythic Dawn cult. But at least he does get to see the ray of hope in the Hero of Kvatch in front of him, even if the Hero of Kvatch is possibly a hideous monster with what you could do with the character creator. He sees hope in him because he sees him in his dreams as the sort of guiding light to help the Empire weather this crisis. And we learn about the assassination in a copy of the Black Horse Courier, Special Edition, Emperor and Heirs Assassinated. Elder Council named as regents. Emperor Uriel Septim VII is dead at the age of 87. Having ruled Tamriel for 65 years, he was killed by assassins unknown. At the same time, in separate locations, the late emperor's 3 sons and heirs, Crown Prince Gadal, Prince Enaman, Prince Ebel, were slain by other assassins. An investigation into the identity and motives of the assassins is underway, but the Elder Council, Imperial Guard, and Blades Guard have forbidden the publication of reports and rumors concerning the event until further notice. By ancient precedent, the Elder Council rules the Empire until a new emperor is crowned. No direct heirs survive, and the Council has proposed no list of candidates. Chancellor Akato, Imperial Battle Mage, speaking for the Elder Council, presented an appeal to the Empire's citizens for calm, and asked that the people remember the Emperor, his sons, and Elder Council in their prayers. Emperor Uriel's early reign was marked by peace and prosperity. The Empress Callis Voria bore him 3 healthy sons, was a loving companion to the Emperor and great favorite of the people. However, the Emperor and the Empire suffered terribly during the Imperial Simulacrum, when he was held captive in Oblivion, while the usurper Jagar Tharn assumed his appearance and ruled in his stead. The Emperor Uriel was finally rescued and restored, and the impostor defeated by the agency of the sorceress Ria Sumlain and her shadowy protege. But the affairs of the Empire were in great disorder, and Empress Kalia Voria, exhausted by her ordeal, withdrew from public life. The decades following the Restoration were once again peaceful and prosperous, but increasing political tensions among the petty states of northwest Tamriel finally erupted in the Wars of the Iliac Bays, resulting in the establishment of the modern borders of Daggerfall, Sentinel, Wayrus, and Orsinium, and culminating with the remarkable events associated with the Warp in the West. The later years of the Emperor's reign have seen a flourishing of imperial influence in the provinces, and with the fortunate resolution of the religious wars in the Vardenfell crisis, and with the wise and firm guidance of King Helseth and his mother, Queen Berenzia, an extension of high imperial culture even into the most remote parts of Morrowind. The Emperor's murder and the murder of his 3 sons is a terrible crime and a great tragedy for the Empire. Battle Mage Akato assures us that all the resources of the Elder Council, the Legion, and the Guard, and the Arcane University, and the Imperial Battle College are being employed to bring the assassins to justice. But in the meantime, the greatest tribute we citizens can offer to the memory of our beloved Emperor is to go earnestly and diligently about our daily affairs, honoring the life of the great empire he loved so much, and served so faithfully for so long. I have to say, I find it really funny that they spent so much time in this piece talking about his wife and how she needed to withdraw from political affairs. And even though in an earlier piece of lore book we learned that they actually hated each other and did not like each other at all, so a little bit of PRing right there from the Empire. And I think also sort of gives us a reasoning to why Martin exists, that basically the Uriel Septim, the seventh, stepped out of the marriage to father other children because he was very unhappy with his empress. And fortunately he did so, because finding Martin and having him relight the dragon fires and take on the avatar of Kvatch and mantling the god of Kvatch is what saves everyone in the Oblivion Crisis. So it's kind of funny that it's actually kind of important that he did that, cheated on his wife. So it's safe to say that he's kind of the player of Elder Scrolls. He's kind of the zaddy, I guess. I definitely with the remaster, he definitely looks a lot better, I'll say that much. But I think looking back on Uriel Septim the Seventh's legacy, we can kind of learn that he was incredibly competent and had supernatural abilities to some extent, and was very cunning and creative, and he was able to sort of have this height of imperial society and have it this complete empire that covered all of Tamriel. But once again, I think it shows that nothing lasts forever, and his sort of, unfortunately, his dying moments, he realized that it was all crumbling around him, basically. He did not get to have his heirs survive. He had to sort of rely on sort of this last-ditched hope prophecy that he saw in the Hero of Kvatch to save things for everyone. Fortunately, the Hero of Kvatch does, but I think the Emperor also knows this, and at least makes peace with it, which I think shows he does have a lot of maturity. I mean, obviously he's 87, but it shows that his character has a lot of maturity, that he's done a lot of things, and obviously we've gone over a lot of it. And it's a really important part of Elder Scrolls lore, and it's a really interesting character to do a deep dive on. And I think it's a really cool character to have sort of hold the hand of the main character of the I think it's a really interesting character to have hold the hand of the player through the tutorial of Oblivion, because I think Oblivion really is sort of this great starting point for Elder Scrolls lore, because it's really accessible, especially now with the remaster. And Uriel Septim is sort of the callback to the very first Elder Scroll and the second Elder Scrolls, and he sort of is a callback to the older games. But also, once again, it sort of is a sign of the times, because by the end of the tutorial, he's dead. And so this is sort of a sign of this is the new Elder Scrolls going forward. So I think it's a really cool tie-in of the old and the new. And he's a really interesting character and has a really interesting place in Elder Scrolls history. Thanks for following me on this lore deep dive. It would mean a lot if you would like the video and subscribe to the channel, and consider becoming a member. It really helps me make more of this content. Thank you.